I want to make the case that the Bible is not just a spiritual book. It's the original success playbook for wisdom, leadership, money, family, discipline, and meaning. Before there was mindset, Scripture talked about renewing the mind. Before there were systems, Scripture talked about daily discipline and faithfulness. Before there was legacy, Scripture talked about generations. Before there was significance, Scripture talked about service. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Proverbs 23:7 states, "For as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." That's mindset. That's identity. That's cognitive reframing. Long before neuroscience caught up. Welcome to the Doctors Investor Club podcast, where physicians and dentists come together to elevate their mindset, build their assets, and create a lasting legacy. I'm your host, Dr. Kyle Stephenson. After years in the OR, I've realized wealth is not just about high income. It's about ownership, freedom, and using your money with purpose. Here at the Doctors Investor Club, we share the strategies the wealthy already know: owning a business, real estate investing, becoming your own banker, and intentional investing. Each week, we sit down with entrepreneurs, investors, and physicians who've stepped off the hamster wheel and are building wealth that outlives them. Because at the end of the day, it's not about how much you make, it's about how much you keep and the impact you leave behind. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to the Doctors Investor Club podcast. If you're listening to this show, chances are you care about growth, not just professionally, but personally. You care about becoming a better physician, a better investor, a better spouse, a better parent, and ultimately a better human being. I know I do. So over the years, I've consumed a lot of personal development. Tony Robbins, Jim Rohn, Bob Proctor, John Maxwell, James Clear, Napoleon Hill, Dale Carnegie, Naval Ravikant, Alex Hormozi, Zig Ziglar. I've studied them all. These people have shaped the way I think about mindset, money, habits, leadership, and success. I'm grateful for the modern voices that have helped shape my thinking. Personal development matters. Growth matters. Success matters. Today is simply about pointing to the foundation beneath it all. Because the deeper I've gone into investing, into leadership, parenting, and life, the harder it's been to ignore something that keeps showing up over and over again. Almost everything we call modern wisdom today was written down thousands of years ago. The principles work. That's why they're repeated. But the source matters. And today, I want to make the case that the Bible is not just a spiritual book. It's the original success playbook for wisdom, leadership, money, family, discipline, and meaning. Now, here's the thesis of this episode. Many of the ideas we hear from modern success educators weren't invented by them. They were drawn from the Bible, whether we realize it or not. Before there was mindset, Scripture talked about renewing the mind. Before there were systems, Scripture talked about daily discipline and faithfulness. Before there was legacy, Scripture talked about generations. Before there was significance, Scripture talked about service. Romans 12:2 says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Proverbs 23:7 states, "For as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." That's mindset. That's identity. That's cognitive reframing, long before neuroscience caught up. As physicians, we respect original sources. We don't just read summaries, we read studies. So let's go back to the source, the Bible. All right, so one of the big things I teach my kids is this. I talk about controlling the controllables. And we discuss this list of 10 things that require zero talent: being on time, work ethic, effort, body language, energy, attitude, passion, being coachable, doing extra, and being prepared. That sounds like modern leadership coaching. But Scripture has been saying this forever. Hebrews 6:12 states, "We do not want you to become lazy, but to imitate those who through faith and patience inherit what has been promised." The Bible doesn't praise talent. It praises faithfulness. Jesus says in Luke 16:10, "Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much." Talent is God-given. Character is God-formed. And as physicians, we know this intuitively. The best doctors aren't always the most brilliant. They're available, they're affable, they're prepared, they show up. That's biblical. All right, let's move on to comfort zones and growth. Tony Robbins states, life begins at the end of your comfort zone. That's true, but it's not new. Every meaningful moment in Scripture happens outside of comfort. Abraham leaves home with no map. Moses confronts Pharaoh. David steps onto the battlefield as a kid to face Goliath, and Peter steps out of the boat. God rarely gives clarity first. He gives obedience first. Proverbs 3:5-6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Notice the order. Trust and submission comes first. Clarity comes later. Proverbs 16:9 reinforces this. In their hearts, humans plan their course, but the Lord establishes their steps. Scripture never promises a full blueprint. It promises direction, one step at a time. James makes this even more practical. In the book of James, chapter 1, 2-4 states, consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. As physicians, we didn't grow through comfort. We grew through long nights, hard cases, uncertainty, and responsibility. Growth always costs something. Scripture doesn't promise comfort. It promises perseverance and purpose. All right, next we're going to talk about proximity, environment, and identity. Jim Rohn, famous entrepreneur, famously said, you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Tony Robbins puts it this way, proximity is power. That's not modern psychology. That's ancient wisdom. Proverbs 13:20 states, walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm. And Proverbs 27:17 adds, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. The Bible understood environment long before psychology gave it language. Transformation does not happen in isolation. It happens in proximity. Jesus didn't just teach crowds. He discipled 12. Paul poured into Timothy. Elijah trained Elisha. And there are other countless examples in the Bible. Growth has always happened through relationship. And the most powerful environment you'll ever shape isn't your mastermind group. It's your home. And this matters deeply for us, not just as investors or physicians, but as parents. Psalm 127 states, children are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their opponents in court. That imagery matters. Children are not possessions, they are arrows. And arrows aren't meant to be stored. They're meant to be aimed, shaped, and released with intention. That's where this connects powerfully with the book Die with Zero Philosophy. Bill Perkins talks about memory dividends, the idea that the greatest returns in life come not from hoarding resources, but from deploying them at the right time when they matter most. Time, energy, presence, attention, those assets only compound if you invest them early. You can always make more money. You can't rewind childhood. Scripture has always said what modern thinkers are rediscovering. Legacy is built through intentional investment, not deferred intention. As physicians, we understand this instinctively. You don't wait until disease is advanced to intervene. You don't delay treatment until the window has closed. You act when the impact is highest. The same principle applies at home. Children aren't an interruption to the mission. They are the mission. Your kids won't become who you tell them to be. They'll become who they watch. When I talk to dads, I say, your sons will follow your example and your daughters will marry it. That's not just a slogan. That's scripture. And in the end, the Bible doesn't measure success by how much you accumulate, but by who you shape, who you serve, and who you become. Next, let's talk about discipline, systems, and daily practice. James Clear, author of Atomic Habits, says, you do not rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. That resonates because it's true. But Scripture has been saying this long before we called them systems. Jesus put it simply, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. Faithfulness in the small things, daily obedience, consistent practice, that's the foundation. There's another principle I've come to believe deeply. The way you do one thing is the way you do everything. If you cut corners in small areas, you'll cut corners in big ones. If you show up prepared in the ordinary, you'll show up prepared when it matters most. Character doesn't turn on and off, it carries over. Galatians 5 lists what Scripture calls the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self control. Against such things, there is no law. To highlight just one of those, another word for self control is discipline. And discipline is not punishment, it's freedom. I've always loved this quote: discipline and consistency will take you much further than motivation ever will. Motivation is emotional, discipline is intentional. And Scripture explains why that works. As I mentioned before, Proverbs tells us, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. In other words, the way you think shapes who you become, and who you become determines how you act. I didn't always have language for that, but I learned it early. Growing up, my dad, my pops, he would wake us up in the morning and say, if you think enthusiastic, then you'll be enthusiastic. At the time, I didn't realize how profound that was. It wasn't hype, it wasn't motivation, it was identity. Years later, when I read Born Rich by Bob Proctor, something clicked. Bob explains that the word enthusiasm comes from the Greek entheo, meaning in God. That stopped me. That hit me hard. True enthusiasm isn't manufactured. It's not caffeine or music or hype. It's alignment. That's why I eventually created a simple framework I live by called DICE. That stands for discipline, integrity, consistency, and enthusiasm. It's not a slogan, but it's a filter. Discipline is doing what must be done, even when you don't feel like it. Integrity, living where your beliefs, words, and actions are aligned. Consistency is doing it repeatedly. And enthusiasm, real enthusiasm, comes when those things are aligned with God. When your habits align with your values, life actually gets lighter, not heavier. As physicians, we understand this instinctively. You don't rely on motivation to show up for patients. You rely on systems, training, standards, habits. Discipline doesn't limit freedom, it creates it. And when discipline, integrity, consistency, and enthusiasm are aligned, that's not burnout, that's sustainable energy. That's how you build a life that lasts. Now let's move on to money and investing. As investors, we talk a lot about returns, risk, leverage, and optimization. But Scripture talks about something deeper: peace, alignment, significance. One of the most powerful passages on wealth in the Bible is Psalm 112. It begins by saying, "How joyful are those who fear the Lord and delight in obeying his commands." That's the foundation. Not hustle, not leverage, not strategy, character first, and believing in him. Then Psalm 112 says something that surprises a lot of people. They themselves will be wealthy and their good deeds will last forever. Scripture doesn't apologize for that. It doesn't shy away from it. But it also makes something very clear. Wealth is never the destination. It's the tool. Psalm 112 describes people who are generous, compassionate, and righteous. People who conduct their business fairly. People who lend generously. People who are calm when bad news comes. That's not anxiety-driven wealth. That's anchored wealth. And this is where Scripture lines up beautifully with what David Brooks describes in The Second Mountain. Great book. Brooks talks about how many high achievers spend the first half of their life climbing the first mountain: success, status, income, recognition. But eventually, many realize that success alone doesn't satisfy. So they turn toward the second mountain, a life centered on service, meaning, contribution, and commitment to something bigger than themselves. The Bible has always pointed us there. Long before we had the language like the second mountain, Scripture warned us about confusing the tool with the purpose. In 1 Timothy 6:10, it says, "For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil." Notice what it does not say. It does not say money is evil. It says the love of money is the problem. When money becomes the goal, it distorts priorities. When it becomes the master, it steals peace. When it becomes identity, it leads to anxiety and emptiness. Scripture doesn't condemn wealth. It condemns misalignment. That's why leaders like John Maxwell and former NFL player Tim Tebow teach that success without significance is empty. Success is what you achieve. Significance is who you serve. Psalm 112 makes that same distinction thousands of years earlier. It describes wealth that is steady, generous, and outward facing. Wealth that produces influence, not ego. Impact, not insecurity. That aligns perfectly with Proverbs 11:24-25. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. Prosperity in Scripture is never disconnected from purpose. Jeremiah 29:11 states, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." That's not a promise of comfort, it's a promise of direction. You don't get rich from revenue alone. You get wealthy through wisdom. And peace of mind has no price tag. As physicians, we see this play out all the time. Burnout doesn't come from work alone, it comes from success without meaning, from climbing the first mountain and realizing you were meant for the second. Psalm 112 reminds us that true wealth is not loud. It's calm, it's generous, it's purposeful, and it lasts, not just in your lifetime, but beyond it. The first mountain builds success, the second builds significance. All right, so next we're going to talk about family and legacy. Again, we're going to reference Psalm 112. It does something profound. It shifts the scoreboard. Their children will be successful everywhere. Their good deeds will last forever. It doesn't say they retired wealthy. It says their children are blessed. That verse tells us something important. The Bible doesn't measure success in quarters or market cycles. It measures success in generations. Scripture's scorecard isn't net worth. It's legacy. Your legacy isn't your CV. It isn't your titles. It's not even your achievements. It's who you raise, who you mentor, and who you serve. This is where I've always appreciated the way R. Nelson Nash, he's the author of Becoming Your Own Banker. I've always appreciated how he taught people to think about money, not as something to chase, but something to steward. Nash didn't teach wealth accumulation for status. He taught generational responsibility. His emphasis was never about getting rich quickly. It was about thinking long-term, building systems that outlive you, creating continuity instead of dependency. That worldview aligns perfectly with Scripture. We aren't owners, we're stewards, and stewards think beyond themselves. Again, Psalm 112 doesn't say their children inherit wealth. It says their children are blessed, successful, grounded. Because what gets transferred most effectively across generations isn't money, it's values, faith, work ethic, generosity, discipline, integrity. As parents and physicians, these hit close to home. Your kids won't remember your income. They'll remember your presence. I always say presence over presence, meaning they want your presence over giving your kids presents. Your kids don't want your presence. They want you. That's not Instagram wisdom. That's Scripture. Legacy is never accidental. It's built intentionally. One decision, one habit, one generation at a time. And in the end, the real scorecard isn't what you leave to your family. It's what you build into them. That's how generations are changed. That's how good deeds last forever. All right, next I want to talk about giving, generosity, and true fulfillment. There's a difference between success and fulfillment. Success is measurable: income, titles, assets, recognition, but fulfillment is something else entirely. As entrepreneur and business coach Keith Cunningham says, success is what you get, fulfillment is what you give. That distinction matters because you can achieve success and still feel empty. But it's very difficult to live a life of service and feel unfulfilled. I remember sitting in church one Sunday and my pastor put up a stat that stuck with me. And this was a few years ago, and I still remember it, and I still have it saved in my phone. The Bible mentions the word believe 272 times. The Bible mentions the word pray 371 times. The Bible mentions the word love 714 times. But the Bible mentions the word give 2,161 times. What does that tell you? Whether you measure exactly that way or not, the point was clear. Giving is not just a side topic in Scripture. It's central to Scripture. Proverbs 11:25 states, "A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed." That's a paradox. Giving doesn't reduce your life, it expands it. Modern voices have rediscovered the same truth. Jim Rohn said, "Only by giving are you able to receive more than you already have." Tony Robbins put it simply, "The secret to living is giving." Zig Ziglar said, "You can have everything in life you want if you will just help enough other people get what they want." And even my own dad. My dad used to tell me, he was one of the most generous people I know. And he used to tell me, when you give, you receive tenfold. Different voices, same principle. But scripture goes even deeper. Acts 20:35 states, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." Not just morally better, more fulfilling as well. This is where everything starts to connect. The first mountain is about achievement. The second mountain is about contribution. You build wealth so you can give. You gain influence so you can serve. You grow so you can help others grow. Because in the end, no one remembers what you accumulated. They remember what you gave. Time, presence, encouragement, opportunity. Those are the things that last. If success is what you build for yourself, fulfillment is what you build for others. All right, so here's the warning I want to leave you with. Principles without God can still produce success, but success without God often produces ego, emptiness, and burnout. Ego, as I've heard before, is a mnemonic for edging God out. Scripture warns us about this clearly. Proverbs 16:18 says, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." And Jesus asks a question that cuts through every achievement, every title, every number on a balance sheet. Matthew 16:26 says, "What good will it be for someone to gain the world, yet forfeit their soul?" The Bible is not opposed to success. It is opposed to anything that takes God's place. God does not seek to remove success from your life. He seeks to keep it from becoming your master. That's not a warning against achievement. It's a warning against misplaced allegiance. Because when success becomes the source, ego grows, peace shrinks, and eventually emptiness shows up, even when everything looks good on paper. As physicians, we see this all the time. People can look incredibly successful and still be profoundly unwell. Scripture never warns us about success. It warns us about serving the wrong master. And that distinction makes all the difference. It reminds me of this video I saw of a guy by the name of Dan Bilzerian. If you ever saw him on social media, Instagram, on paper, he lived what culture tells young men, this is the dream. He basically lived like Hugh Hefner. He had private jets and yachts and oceanfront homes and beautiful women everywhere, unlimited money, former military background, high stakes gambling. It looked like freedom. And yet I heard him say something that caught my attention. He was on a podcast and he talked about his life and how it looked so good on paper, and it looked good to young guys, especially, who saw all the beautiful women in the yachts and all the freedom. And he said, you would think that this life would be very fulfilling, but in fact, it wasn't. He said, what actually brings, after all the things I've learned, what actually brings fulfillment is free. It's not the things that I spend a ton of money on. It's free. It's faith. It's purpose. It's deep relationships. It turns out the most fulfilling things in life are not expensive at all. They're eternal. So in closing, Tony Robbins did not invent truth. Jim Rohn did not discover wisdom. Modern educators didn't create these principles. They rediscovered what Scripture has been teaching all along. The Bible isn't outdated. It's undefeated. Before I close, I want to leave you with a small, simple challenge. A couple years ago, I decided I wanted to read through the one-year Bible, and it takes you through Old Testament, New Testament, Proverbs, and Psalms each day for 365 days. I'll be honest, it didn't take me 1 year. It took me about 2. I just finished it, and I started it in early 2024, so right at the beginning of 2024. And I read it consistently for about 6 months. And then we had our son, our third kid, in June. And then, life happened and I got away from it. But I did get back into it, and I finished it. And so I can honestly say it's one of the most meaningful accomplishments of my life. It was powerful. I learned a great deal in that book, not because I did it perfectly, but because I did it faithfully, day by day, page by page, season by season. So here's my challenge to you. What would change if you spent the next year building your life, not just your portfolio, on the source instead of the summary? Not reading more about wisdom, but going back to where it actually comes from. You don't need to start fast. You just need to start. Because the same principles that build great investors, great physicians, and great leaders are the ones that build great lives. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next time.
This is my time. I'm on the rise. Can't hold me down. I'm too fly. This is my time.
Thanks for listening to the Doctors Investor Club podcast. I hope today's conversation inspired you to think bigger, dream bolder, and take the next step toward financial freedom. If you're a doctor or dentist and you're ready to join our community, head over to doctorsinvestorclub.com. There you'll find our free mobile app and private forum, built exclusively for physicians and dentists, featuring AI tools, curated investor resources, and live event access. And if you're at the stage where you want to see real estate opportunities we personally invest in, you can visit investwithdrkyle.com. There's no pressure, just transparency, education, and access when you're ready. Subscribe to the show, share it with a colleague, and remember, you're not just building wealth, you're building a legacy.
This is my time, ready to shine.